Hello and welcome everyone. Very happy that we're all together again. In this tutorial we will start talking about a new important and essential light current system, which is the telephone system. So fasten your belt and let's get started. The aim of this tutorial is to introduce the different types of telephone systems as an introduction to our topic. Then we will learn about the analog telephone system and its different components, as we need to analyze the analog or the traditional telephone system by knowing its different parts and how each of them is working. So let's go ahead. First of all, to introduce the telephone system, we find that it's a basic system in communication that is used essentially for communication between the different users who may lay in a small local area like the small buildings, for example, if we are talking about a common area building like the hospitals or the commercial buildings or the administrative buildings, where we should use a standard communicating system that connects all of the employees in the building with each other. So, unlike those buildings, we use the telephone system that connects all of the working team members in the building with each other in a small or a local area like the administrative buildings, for example. Also, we use the telephone system for communication in a wide area, for connecting between the different users in a larger area, like connecting two persons in the same city, or even in the same country, or even in two different countries. So what we wanted to say is that the telephone system is used in communication through the local area like the same building scale, or in a wide area like the different countries scale when you are at your home and you need to communicate with a person in your country or in your city or in a different country. Now for the different types of the telephone systems, we find that we have two main types of the telephone system. The first one is the analog telephone system, or the traditional one, and at this type of systems we use the analog signal directly to communicate between two telephones or two persons, where the voice signal is converted to an electrical signal directly, which is an analog signal sent from the first telephone, then it reaches the second telephone as a voice signal after converting it back from the electrical signal. So the main idea of this system is that the voice signal is converted to an electrical signal. On the other hand, the second type of telephone systems is the digital telephone system, and this type of telephone system simply converts the analog telephone signal from one device to a digital signal of zeros and ones. Then it transmits this signal from zeros and ones from one telephone to another telephone. And when the digital signal reaches the second device, it's converted back to an analog voice signal where the receiving person can recognize. So the main difference between the analog telephone system and the digital telephone system is that for the digital system, it transmits a digital electrical signal of zeros and ones, while for the analog telephones, it transmits an analog electrical signal like the sine wave, for example. Very good. Now we need to know what are the different components of the analog telephone system, or what are the different parts that the analog telephone system consists of. Here we find the first component that the analog telephone system consists of is the telephone outlet itself, or the socket that the telephone cable will be plugged in. And here we find the type of the analog telephone outlets or its socket to be called RJ11, which is this one here. And this RJ11 telephone outlet differs a little bit from the RJ45 outlet, which we discussed in the data system if you remember, as this outlet here is having a small width and it's connected to a small number of wires, so it's detected easily by locking. Hence, you can distinguish between the telephone outlet and the data outlet easily by locking, where the telephone outlet width is small while the data outlet width is wider. And here for this analog telephone outlet, it can be installed on the floor of the room or it can be installed on the wall of the room. And we install it in the floor of the room if we are having a workstation or a partition of disks, exactly as what we illustrated in the data system, as the outlet itself consists of a data outlet and a telephone outlet. Like this case here, you can see this floor-mounted data outlet is installed in the floor or for the partition disks, and it has those two telephone outlets and it has one data outlet. So we use the telephone outlet in the same application that we may use the data outlet at which, and in like those cases, if we used the floor-mounted telephone outlet, it needs some special requirements of the higher ingress protection, which is about 66, and this is to against the dust and the water, as it will be installed on the floor, so it needs to be protected well from the water or from the dust or even from the mechanical shocks, exactly as we illustrated before in the data system. Also, the second installation method we have is to install the telephone outlets at the wall, and here is the shape of the wall-mounted RJ11 telephone outlet where it's installed on the wall. And the most common application at which we use the wall-mounted telephone outlets is the residential applications, or according to the architectural plan, if we found that the furniture is nearer to the walls, so we can use the wall-mounted telephone outlet installed in those cases. But generally, we install the telephone outlets according to the furniture. Very good. Now the second component of the analog telephone system is the telephone cable, and we find that the cabling system of the analog telephone system to be more simplified than the cabling system of the data system, as here for the telephone system, each telephone outlet needs just one pair of copper cables. So we use a one pair copper cable for each telephone line or for each telephone outlet. Like this case here, you can see this is a one pair copper cable that is used for transmitting the telephone electrical signal. And for the cross-sectional area of each copper wire of those wires, it can be 0.4 mm, 0.6 mm, and 0.8 mm. So any of those three cross-sectional areas of each wire of those wires can be used for the telephone system. But the most used one that we use commonly in designing the telephone system is the 0.6 mm copper cable. And here is how the cable is specified, as it's stated as 1 times 2 times 0.6 mm copper cable, where 1 means 1 pair and 2 times 0.6 means that we have 2 wires and each of them is having a cross-sectional area of 0.6 mm. Also, we find the advantage of this telephone cable is that its length can reach up to 1000 meters. So we can use the long cable as much as what we need without losing the signal, as the cable can go along 1000 meters without distortion or attenuation in the analog transmitted signal of the telephone lines. Also, the important note is that for the telephone outlets, we can use the same previous cable, but we have 2 pairs this time, not 1 pair. So, 2 pairs copper cable can be used also in some projects where it's specified by 2 times 2 times 0.6 mm copper cable, where the first 2 is representing the 2 pairs of the copper cable and the second 2 inside the parentheses represents the 2 wires of each pair. So we have now 4 wires represented in 2 pairs. And in this case, the second pair is used just as a spare, as if there is a cut or a damage in 1 pair, we don't need to change the cable totally, but we use the second pair in this case in case of damaging the first pair. So this is the only usage of the second pair, which is to be used as a spare. As we said, the analog telephone system needs just 1 pair for transmitting the telephone signal. So that's for the cabling system for the telephone outlet. But what about the ingoing telephone cable that is used for feeding many telephone outlets? As for the telephone system distribution, we are having a box that is called the junction box, where it has an input main telephone cable and it has some outgoing cables which are used to feed each telephone outlet. For example, if we need to feed 30 different telephone outlets, in this case we will use 30 outgoing telephone cables, and each of them will feed one single telephone, and each of them may be one pair of cable or two pairs as we said previously. But what about the ingoing cable to the telephone distribution box? Here for the ingoing cable it will be just one telephone cable, but it's a multi-pair cable at this case. So it will be a multi-pair telephone cable with a number of pairs that equals the number of the outgoing telephone outlets. For example, if we have 30 telephone outlets, we will use a 30-pair telephone cable. So what we need to say is that the telephone cables can have a number of pairs as much as required according to the number of telephone lines that we need to feed. Hence, we can have a 10-pair telephone cable, 20 pairs, 30 pairs, and it can be up to 1000 pairs. So we can have a larger number of pairs as much as possible, that may be 1000 pairs of a telephone cable. Also, the next important note about the multi-pair telephone cables is that it can be a steel armored one, like this case here, where a steel jacket is covering all of the inside pairs of the cable, and this is to protect the cable from any mechanical shocks in case of we will use the cable for the outdoor applications. So for the outdoor applications, we use the steel armored telephone cable. As for the outdoor applications, the cables are susceptible to the mechanical shocks or the cuts. Hence, we reinforce the cable using the steel armoring like this case here. More than great. So that's about this tutorial, at which we started talking about the different components of the analog telephone system. Hope that's clear right now. Thank you for watching and see you next tutorials.